it was thrilling to listen also a bit to the previous discussion, because it is crystal clear then that when we talk about ecosystem and alliances, one of the fundamental key prerequisites to make that happen is, of course, trust and trustworthiness. And that's in particular true when we look into IoT and next generation IoT and edge computing scenarios, of course, which rely on data sharing. And therefore, I'm more than happy that we have a great lineup here in the panel that has already been mentioned by Monique, but I'd like to stress that once more. So I'd like to welcome Sonja Zillner. She is lead of core company technology module Trustworthy AI at Siemens. Also, I'd like to welcome Dirk Slamer, Vice President Co-Innovation and IT and IoT Alliances at Bosch. And last, but of course not least, Arthur van der Vees, Managing Director and Founder at Arthur's Legal. I would like to make the proposal that we use first names, because I feel that in, let's say, in international settings, it is quite nice, and I would propose to stick with it. Let me just for, let's say, housekeeping, couple of rules. We would like to start with a brief statements of all of these three panelists, like around about 4 or 6 minutes or so. And then we engage, of course, into a discussion. And of course, all the audience is asked to be as active as possible. So drop your question into the chat, and we will then make sure that we will integrate them into the conversation. Well, saying that, I think we should not lose more time, and we should jump right in. And I believe if we follow, let's say, the lineup, then the first statement would be given by Dirk. So Dirk, if I can ask you to give your interest statement, please.
Sure, Boris, thanks for having me, and hi also to Sonja and Arthur and everybody else listening today. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Digital trust, of course, is the deciding factor in the digital transformation journey, and I think there are many different aspects. They are related to the regional perspectives, in particular, of course, Europe, America, Asia. They are related to the B2C versus B2B perspective, where we see very different levels of urgency and needs, and also expertise. And I would actually even, in addition to the B2C and B2B perspective, add the B2 public perspective, because that's maybe a third really important one. And when we look at these different perspectives, for the end consumer, digital trust in a lot of cases actually starts with, can I trust in the functionality of the services? Can I trust that actually I'm getting some services that are relevant to me, that are even interesting to me? Yeah? This is, I think, something that we sometimes forget from the B2B perspective, where naturally you jump to, you know, is it safe? Is it secure? How are we handling data sharing policies? What about AI and AI ethics, etc.? Yeah, I think this is what comes natural to, and this is obviously key and important, yeah, but it's maybe not what the end user has on his mind first. So I think one key question is, how do you bridge that gap? Then I think if you look at this from the perspective of, let's say, these different regional perspectives, yeah, there's also you know, some tendencies that we can see from a control-based perspective on this topic to a let's say risk management based perspective to a value creation perspective. Yeah, I mean, if you look at GDPR as one of the first things that we did in the EU, I still would argue that you find people who are saying this was you know, one of the biggest business hindrances from a European point of view, but you will also equally find other people who are saying, no, this is really becoming a USP, where the EU basically can put forward a certain way of living and handling this from a societal point of view. And I think when we're looking today more specifically at some also of the technical issues, in particular, the whole edge versus cloud discussion, I think naturally we will be looking at also some more industrial use cases, but I think we should not forget that at the end of the day, a lot of these industrial use cases then eventually also will translate to end consumer use cases. And I'm really looking forward to discussing all of these different aspects with you today.
Yeah, that was already very inspiring. Thank you very much, Dirk. Perhaps before we move to Sonja, a quick question from my side. I mean, what I liked is, of course, you outlined a little bit. Okay, well, how do we trust? And I mean, of course, I mean, we have a long history in, let's say, trying to implement trust in information technology. But in the end, it's also a behavioral concept, right? And I mean, if we look into IoT communication, and in fact, in the first place, communication between machines, what are limitations in that regard? And also, where do you see opportunities in that regard? Transferring, let's say, the concept of trust more intensively, as we've did it before, from the consumer arm where a human being interacts with a service to an IoT environment where basically data sharing and edge computing is basically negotiated among machines, right? Any opinion from on that, Dirk? But yeah.
Sure. Well, I think there is the consumer-facing discussion to be had. Yeah. How much of this is actually visible to the consumer? Right. Yeah. So if I'm buying an intelligent toy and this is taking images of my kids in the bedroom, and these images end up, in the public, then yes, it becomes visible. But what is with all things which are not so visible, right? So what if this intelligent toy is starting to share this data, or if I'm having an intelligent vacuum robot in my home, which is starting to sell the floor plans to my buildings to somebody who's interested in this, and this is actually not visible to me. Yeah, so I think that these are two very different aspects, and I think that from an enterprise point of view, we really need to make sure that we differentiate between making things visible and transparent, but also that we should see this as an opportunity if we do this properly and establish trust by doing exactly this, that this also means that yes, certain things can be done. If you are building a vacuum cleaning robot and part of your business model is, I don't know, you're giving away the robot for free and you're making money by selling off the data, and you're making this transparent to the user, then why should this not be a viable business opportunity? So this means that we cannot always assume that we cannot do these kind of things because they're bad in general. I think this is very much a question about what kind of policies do we implement in terms of making this transparent to the user, and also always giving him an opt-out.
Yeah. I think that is a very strong point that you make. So, but basically, what's the business model of trust, and couldn't we turn it around, like not always be afraid, but really using it, let's say, also as a value creation element? But before we move into that in more detail, and also I see we have already questions in the chat. First, I would suggest to park these 2 points for later, and now then Arthur, we come to your opening statement. Arthur, please.
Well, thank you very much, and of course, thank you, Piers, Max, Rolf, and others for the invitation. Really happy to be here. I will try to, as same as the others, start with an introduction of 4 or 5 minutes, Boris, as you mentioned, but I think a couple of slides help out. I will not go through them all. I think currently we are talking in another way of looking at the ViChat report is looking from connectivity currently, where mostly, we have siloed approaches, and towards the federation, which we could call interconnectivity. And we're not even there yet at hyperconnectivity, but then if we indeed have intelligence nodes, as NXP colleague just mentioned, then, we get to that level. And even though I'm an attorney at law, I know it's very important to understand the technical stack. And I think I want to show it because the balance of this is going to change if we come from connected to interconnected to hyperconnected. Because indeed the computing will be moved to a sensor side, the algorithms will run in the sensor side, and data may stay at a particular place, right? So another thing that is very important is, but I will go very quickly here because it's already been acknowledged that functional itself is nothing, doesn't mean it works. So if it functions, it doesn't mean the system works. The non-functionalities, what if things go wrong, on security, on safety, on privacy, on data management, on accountability. So how do you fix it? How do you help out in remediating those kind of things are very important. And with that, we can avoid going and moving to responsibility and liability. And as a lawyer, I actually prefer to help out in making those accountable systems all the way up. So these are not problems, even though, still read sometimes that trust and privacy and security is seen as a problem and an inhibitor and even as a hampering of innovation. I totally don't agree. I think actually it's the other way around. It's absolutely an essential, it's a solution, and it's definitely not a problem. So when we move into more these swarming, as Max mentioned, and also to intelligence or at least AI at the edge, as also mentioned by Martin, that means also that we need to start, and I'm not talking about one or two devices, but about, let's say, thousands or hundreds of thousands. We need to then look in those trust elements all the way at the component, the sensor, and the device level, because that particular sensor or device may need to communicate, interact with the others in an interoperable way. So we need to, for instance, just an example, think about interoperable security. So not only security of the device, but also how it does it communicate, and can it trust the other? So it's not only trust between people and organizations and IoT, but also the IoT systems themselves. So it's not only for each device or each component, but it's also combined and end-to-end. So it's complex, but absolutely doable, in my point of view. And when we add the human rights, human values, and other European values and universal values to it, you see a lot of them. are not going to work all through them, but you see a lot of things regarding identity, including people, organizations, and of course things, but also of course a lot about data. And one thing I heard already from Max and others is data access. And I think the word data access is great, but we need to perhaps focus more on trusted data sharing that you see on your right, and not necessarily sharing the data itself from the source, but the attributes. So zero knowledge proof, for instance. So you don't know how old somebody is, but the person is old enough to do something. Only green light is then possible. And with that, you can also have a different approach of certification and making sure that it actually works. So my last one is how to get there, because we always talk about trust and the nuances of trust, but I don't think it's difficult. It's just a matter of starting at the right page, and we need to start with taxonomies, not trying to push one standard but a framework, a meta framework, as the European Commission already is working for many years, principle-based approach, and then actually all the different standards that are already there and the gaps that we may see can help out. We can extrapolate certain items of it. And here in my office, by the way, my office consists of 90% women, so diversity, and they are working on AI and IoT every day. So just to state this. But we here have identified from all the standards that we have found related to IoT and cyber physical system more than 500 unique trust principles, right, on security, on privacy, on safety, and the other. So there is already quite a lot. things will go to real time, which means, and trust is a mathematical summary of consistency divided through time. So that's going to be, the thing we need to work on. And with that, I would like to stop, because of course I can talk about this topic, as you can hear, a long time in a very passionate way.
Very good, Arthur. That's and indeed that came across quite nicely. Very good. So you mentioned one point that was also addressed in the chat already, which basically is related to accountability. And in the chat, somebody, I think, was it Valentino? I think Valentin Popescu. He asked it. Okay, we all know these accidents of autonomously driving cars, and also in the light of, let's say, the European AI regulation. In fact, certain accidents happened without, let's say, autopilots reporting any kind of incidents or malfunction. So, well, in your opinion, who's in the end accountable if something goes wrong, and if trust is misused? Let's call it like that.
Exactly. Yeah, we heard already somebody else before in the previous panel talk about chicken and egg. I always like to say, using the chicken and egg visual, and then saying stop pointing at others. Accountability is your own responsibility. Everybody in an IoT ecosystem, whether it's connected, interconnected, or hyperconnected, so depending on the maturity, that doesn't matter, but in the ecosystem, everybody has their own accountability, but we also have our group accountability, even to the non-users, which is society. And in Planet is also a non-user, as we heard already, and green and sustainability, I didn't talk about it, was one of my slides. So when we talk about who is responsible, pointing fingers and saying, no, what we saw with the accident last week, immediately that somebody says, yes, but the autopilot was off. Well, first of all, I'm very interested to understand why a company knows that, and whether we should trust that statement, because when did they look at it? Just before the crash or just after the crash, right? And that could be so I don't think it should be one organization that takes care of it. And at the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation, AOTI, we have worked on a risk spectra, so not one spectrum but multiple, already 15 layers, that we try to map risk classification, and it does include the AI perspective. And you will definitely immediately see that there are multiple stakeholders. And you can't point to the other. You need to point to yourself first, and otherwise, in my point of view, you should not be part of the team.
Okay, very good. So, okay, Sonia, great to have you back. And let's give it another try.
Yeah, thanks to welcome me back. I think I now go without slides. So basically, I think we have time for the discussion, and we do not want to repeat the technical issue.
Please move ahead. The floor is yours.
At least pictures on the slide. So let's do it like this. So basically, the main message, I wanted to talk a little bit about the characteristics of industrial AI application. And I mean, in the context of the edge and IoT capabilities, right? And I mean, it's when you think about a drone application, you think about that this is like flying around. It has AI on it. It needs to have edge technology. It has to be safety requirements. It has to be, there's connectivity, there's mechatronics. So there's a lot of different technologies. So basically what is needed, we need to integrate. So basically we need to ensure that all these different technology areas are aligned, that they're federated efforts, and that we come together also in terms of validation and testing. I will come to this point later. Data sharing, I think I do not need to repeat. It was mentioned by many other speakers who have talked about this before. I mean, we have industrial data, we have personal data. We need to share it in secure, controlled, and transparent manner. I think that is shared upon everybody. Last, what I would like to highlight is that we have, because the session is about trustworthiness, I mean, in terms of safety, reliability, security, privacy, and many different requirements are covered by trustworthiness. And we already have a lot of legislation in place, right? We should not forget, I mean, safety rules, GDPR, and stuff like this. So a lot of stuff is already regulated, and we need to understand how the AI capabilities are translated to these requirements coming from legislation. So this is in terms of setting the scene. In terms of what the AI, data and robotics community has already addressed. So here I could now show a nice picture about the European AI data framework. Some of you might know this. So basically here, this was developed by around 500 contributions across Europe. We have been like 2 years where we worked together, and we wanted to highlight in terms of AI, data and robotics, what are the areas we want to work for. So we are talking about the European AI data robotics framework, so that fundamental rights principles are there, how we can generate value, what to do in the context of legislation, policy, certification standards. Then innovation enablers are very central. Data for AI, we need experimentation, deployment. So I mean, and then we also talk about all the cross-sectorial AI data and robotics technology enablers. So they are ranging from the sensing perception to the knowledge and learning to the decision making, interaction, action, and also systems, methodologies, tools, hardware. So basically all the AI capabilities. When we scoped the paper, trustworthiness popped up all the time. So basically, do we need an extra box for trustworthiness? Yeah. So is this a core capability we should address? And basically, at the end of the day, I mean, this become very obvious that the core characteristics that AI enabled, so that trustworthiness is a core characteristics of AI systems, right? So basically, you need to build trustworthiness in it. It is critical to acceptance and therefore for successful deployment. We have some critical applications. I mean, they are discussed in detail also in the new AI regulation. But so basically, then we could say, should we only focus on them? No, I mean, trustworthiness, all application needs to be trustable. So it's a central part for all of the applications. What is very central for me is that trustworthiness is a property of the whole system. So basically, it is created by how the different technology building blocks are interacting, and it is designed into the system. So we cannot stop by saying AI algorithm has a good benchmark, right? It needs to be integrated in the overall system, and for that, the technology integration, overarching standards are really central. So basically, it's a system. Trustworthiness is built on many characteristics. This is reliability, dependability, safety, and it needs also be proven while the system is running, right? So basically, this is in terms of what is technically needed and why I think the collaboration with IoT edge community is very central. Last but not least, I wanted to share with you, and it's a little bit answering the question or point raised by Hubert before, to be technology. So what is the need? What is the value? What do we want to bring forward? And it's one example I wanted to share, which was developed inside Siemens. It's a stress monitoring application in trains. Currently, we are not traveling so much in trains, but you can imagine that the train is fully blocked with people. And here the goal is to ensure that if there's like stress situation with the people who are in the train, that they could be, this is a safety issue, right? If some person is ill, or like you need medical care, or if there are like aggression between people. So basically, way to move this situation or like out is to establish video and to observe single people, the group, right? So basically, you have like technique in place where you could bring safety inside crowded places. However, on the cost of data privacy, question mark. So basically, is this then on cost of data privacy because you're suddenly observing all these people? And now edge technology comes into place, because if you use the algorithm on the device, then you do not need to store the data. So the device, it's like the camera itself becomes a volatile system. It's only like reporting back if the likeliness or it's likely that there's a dangerous situation, and then the data, it is okay that it is stored, right? So basically, what I want to bring forward here, two main messages, is that technology integration will be needed in terms of ensuring trustworthy or addressing trustworthy requirements. I think it is important to ensure that we can test integrated systems. and that they bring a lot of value to Europe and applications we can implement.
Very good. Thank you, Sonja. So we are having really a lot of questions in the chat. First of all, I'd like to correct myself because the question for accountability came from, I believe it was Norbert, and not Valentin. Valentin was so kind to remind me that he's only facilitating the chat. So just for the sake of completeness. So, but what you said, Sonja, is quite interesting because you also mentioned a little bit the notion that we have to balance things. And on the one hand side, of course, we are interested in particular in IoT environments, in trustworthy systems, as you said. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that entry barriers are not too high, right? Because in many times, ensuring trustworthiness of a system, in particular, if we look also into certification, let's be frank, it's an overhead, right? So that basically raises entry barriers in general. So how do you see this issue to balance these kind of different goals that we probably pursue? Because it's
actually,
adoption, yes, please, sorry.
Actually, this discussion on an abstract level is very difficult to do, because I mean the trustworthiness is not a characteristics of a technology only, but an interaction with an environment. So basically, we need to go back to understand what criticality in place, right? So what the way how we are using the technology, do we really like harm a person, an infrastructure, and in accordance to this, and at the end of the place, if there is a person or like a system or like a group of people, if there is a harm, if there is safety issues, then we need to act. And then it's also about moving forward. I think what we need to have is a much more distinguished understanding of criticality, and that we really know where to put efforts to and to address situation. And on the other side, you should also not forget, I mean, in terms of the example I showed, you could also say, oh my God, you have to do additional things because of the GDPR. But on the other side, I mean, it's the technology, it's possible, right? Yeah. So basically, it's also a nice way in terms of developing innovation.
So I like your point very much. That depends on basically on the context and the use case and the risk appetite, so to say, one has. But let me also go back with this point to Dirk, because you mentioned also, let's turn it around a little bit, and let's not always see, let's say, trustworthiness driven by compliance or being afraid that something goes wrong, but turn it around into a business value, right? Would you like to comment on this aspect once more, Dirk?
Sure. I think if you combine this perspective with the point you made before, so what's the investment that's necessary? Yeah. I think it really starts in the early stages of designing the new digital services and solutions. And I think Sonja, from an AI expert point of view, I'm sure you can confirm, getting an AI model to work is one thing, but getting it robust and explainable is another thing. Yeah. So this is a key thing to ensure, for example, that there's no bias in the model, or no uncontrolled behavior. So this is something that really needs to start in the early development stages of your project. Yeah? And then the same obviously applies to how you're dealing with data, be this data in a large company that's completely controlled by that one company, or actually, if it's a big company, I know one or two of them, how does it look if you share data between different divisions, which might be legal entities? And then obviously, the whole Gaia X discussion and the data spaces discussion. These are decisions that as a project manager you need to make, and they are both strategic as well as technical decisions. And I think you always have to make sure that you look at them both from a business value creation as well as from a trustworthiness point of view. Yeah, because if you don't get the business value creation point right, you will not have a system that matters to anybody, So the whole question about digital trust is moot, right? On the other hand, if you don't focus on the digital trust when building up the system, it will be nearly impossible to retrofit this into the system. Yeah, so this is why I think it needs to be all going hand in hand. And then you raised the question about how do we, at the end of the day, certify this to the outside world? Yeah, that what you did actually is effectively a trustworthy system. And Sonja, I mean, you gave us the long list, right? Robustness and reliability and resilience and like all these things. I think one thing is you will simply get the free feedback from the street. So if your system is not robust, your phone will ring. Yeah, and then obviously there's the whole question of certification. So big question is, what are you certifying? Is it your organization? Is it your product? And then another big question is this more a self-certification approach, or is it based on a third-party assessment? And again, here the question is, how do you balance out the benefits of a third-party assessment versus the cost of it? And I'm not only talking about the hard dollars that you're forking over to the assessment authority. I'm also talking about the resources that this is binding. Yeah? I think that's obviously something that you have to look at in the light of, you know, what's the criticality of the system that you're building, etc. So that's of course a very important topic.
So very good, and I think we will touch upon, let's say, this question about, let's say, well, how to assert or certify or assess trustworthiness later on, because there was also another question in the chat. But we had Dirk, you also touched upon a very interesting other topic about data sharing, and let's say also the value and the risk that's related to that. And there was one question also from the chat that is related to that, which I would like to address Arthur with, because the question is, let's say, is there something like data exchange frameworks that allow, let's say, for automatic monetization of data once it's shared? So basically some sort of a built-in billing service. And if so, well, what would be put on the invoice, right? I mean, which amount of euros should be right down there? What's your opinion on that, Arthur? Yeah, but the entire monetization topic.
Yeah, so it's of course easy. The question is easy. The answer is very extensive. So I'm not able to answer, unfortunately, everything. But just a couple of thoughts. First of all, data is not a four-letter word. We have raw data, but if we can already on that level make it have the principle of data minimalization in, then already we are, you know, are taking away a lot of issues regarding security, privacy, safety, and, you know, even our sovereignty, both our self-sovereignty, right, but also of our society. So that's the first one. So second, if you structure data, then it's called information, and I mentioned attributes. Attributes is just another name of a new layer of information, and that is, I think, very important. Instead of sharing data and then you don't know what the other is doing with it, why not, you know, getting a query in and you don't need to do that manually, query in, and then, you know, the particular answer is being provided, which can be, of course, and should be an evidence-based approach. With that, you know, we are avoiding sharing data that you only want for a particular answer, and then it's gone, right? Because it's digital, and when it's digital, it means it can be copied indefinitely. And let's face it, nobody is that good currently at deleting data. We would like to keep it. It's addictive for later, and I think we really should focus on creating. It sounds a little bit strange, but creating as little data as possible, and of course as much as necessary. This is I think, an essential point. then on the sharing, it's not only about the data, whether you can trust the data, right? So it's coming from the information, the attributes coming from the right source. And then if you need other sources to come to an appropriate level of trust, because that is what I think quite important. The level of trust is different. It's contextual, right? And I would like to refer, I'm a lawyer, I'd like to refer to Article 32 and 25 of the GDPR. You know, there's a formula in that. It's very nicely written formula, and basically it's continuous, appropriate, contextual, dynamic accountability. So it depends on the context, and I will give you one puzzle with you. Perhaps you can think about that, or the other colleagues here in this panel. We're not only looking at the intended use of a application, right? We also talk about the expected use, because we're certifying only on intended use, even though we know it's going to be used for something else, which we see now a lot of times. Then I think we're also accountable to take care of the expected use. But hey, there's a third one. There's an actual use as well, which means that the repurposing of systems or devices that we also need to think about. So I have intended use, expected use, and actual use that we also need to take into the equation. Looping back to the data sharing, this is a very interesting way of trying to plot how to what kind of data you need from which stakeholders, what the values are, because data is not. Is also it's a means, it's value. For somebody it's only a means. For the other, like raw material. For the other one, it's a value, and that I think with value models, and then indeed a business model, you can add it to the equation. Whether you want to convert it into money or impact, you know, it's up to the ecosystem.
Very good. Yeah. So we are already, let's say, 1:45, but since we were forced to start 5 minutes later, I'll take the same, let's say, right to do that as well. So because, and I want to use this little additional amount of time to ask everybody for a closing statement, but also asking you to, in this closing statement, refer to, let's say, a point that was raised at least in 2 questions in the chat, which I like very much, to be honest, because it's a cool one. So what about measurability of trustworthiness? So can we measure trustworthiness? And I'd like to start, Sonja, with you, if you may. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think, so basically to sum it up, I think it is central that technical disciplines are working together because trustworthiness can only be reached on a system level. So basically we need to understand the interaction, how to design the product, and understand how it will be used. In terms of measurable, we need to have benchmarks in place on a technology component level, like the robust AI algorithm, but also on the system level, and they can be quantitative and qualitative. In terms of measurable, I think this will be central in order that we have like benchmarks and KPIs that we can communicate forward. I do not think that all of the KPIs and benchmarks will be measured in numbers, but that you need to communicate, you need to explain the algorithm, you need to convey the message to, for example, a safety person. But in general, both is yes, we need to put forward more energy also to work on this. Okay, very good. Yeah, then Dirk, your opinion on that, or combined also with a final statement from yourself, Dirk.
I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a measure of success, and I think it's a super important topic, and I hope from an EU point of view, we can measure this success by making sure that digital trust really becomes an essential success factor and USP for what we're doing.
Sounds good. Yeah, very good. Arthur, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, already Sonja mentioned already quantifying quality. So a qualitative approach is still difficult to get it into binary numbers. So that means it's still the human feel, also things we don't see, like a spectrum, right? We only see a little part of the spectrum, or the light spectrum. Will continue to be a combination. So both on the technical side, try to quantify quality, and on the human side, I have one principle that I want to add to this, which probably nobody have thought about yet, or perhaps you did. You know, the main trust principle, in my point of view, in the digital age, is the principle of no surprises. It's a very nice validation tool that you can also explain to any CEO, manager, or any person at the public and private sector. You know, nobody likes surprises, and it's a very nice validation tool at the end that you can ask, you know, so what kind of surprises can we expect? And then they say, yeah, this and that, but we have our terms and conditions sorting out, pushing away our responsibility. You know, then at least you can have a debate about it. So no surprises.
Yeah, that's a cool thing, because I mean, it would really, this point would really qualify for another hour of discussion, because in the chat there was a question like, how do we balance, let's say, innovation and sticking to controls, right? I mean, if the big innovators probably did not stick too much to, let's say, existing frameworks and thought of out of the box. But okay, yeah, I think it was actually time flew by, as always in these kind of hot topic discussions. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of you three to your great input, and I think it was really eye-opening and thrilling with cool ideas. I'm really much looking forward to continuing this discussion. I think this will of course not be the last panel on this topic, and also not the last panel in this, let's say, environment and context. So thank you all very much.